The slab cracked through the corridor before Darius Kane knew his fingers had tightened around the brass knob. Another blow, sharper, followed by a strangled whimper no hallway should ever hold. His mother's voice. Breath left his lungs in a hard rush. He pushed the door. Warm lamplight spilled across the carpet of the private suite and hit a scene his mind tried to reject. Eleanor Kane, small inside her wheelchair, flinched with her forearm raised, the thin blue veins along her wrists dark against paper skin. Facing her, too close, stood Sienna, the maid who had lived under this roof for years, her arms still high from the strike, eyes flat, jaw set. The red bloom across Eleanor's cheek deepened as Darius watched. He didn't speak at first. The air smelled of lavender lotion and metal, the kind of metallic breath rooms get when pain hangs around too long. The grandfather clock in the adjoining sitting room ticked like it wanted to announce what had happened and couldn't. In the mirror over the dresser, Darius saw three figures, the old woman, the maid, and himself, a man stalled at the boundary between disbelief and rage. Sienna lowered her hand slowly and turned toward him. She did not flinch. "You weren't supposed to be back tonight," she said, voice even. Eleanor's lips quivered. "Don't let her," the rest disappeared in a rasp. Darius stepped in and closed the door with a quiet click that felt louder than a shout. "What did you just do?" His voice came out rough, raw. "I did what no one else here had the spine to do," Sienna said. "You hit my mother." Even saying it tasted wrong. Sienna's gaze didn't move. "She is not the woman you think she is." Eleanor reached a trembling hand toward him. Her pearl bracelet had twisted halfway up her forearm. He noticed it because he needed to notice anything that wasn't the bruise. "She's dangerous, Darius. Please." The room's temperature seemed to drop. The lamplight flickered, shadows stretched like they were listening. Every instinct told him to lunge, to yank Sienna out by the wrist, to call security and flood the suite with witnesses and consequences. But another instinct, older, colder, forged in boardrooms where the first move is often the dumbest, held him still. Sienna looked like someone who'd waited years for this exact moment. People who wait that long carry knives you can't see. If you've ever opened a door and felt your stomach split in two, subscribe now, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what you're about to hear will turn love into doubt. "Explain yourself," he said, quieter. Sienna tipped her chin toward Eleanor without looking away from him. She watched the worst of this family and called it tradition. "I watched it ruin my father." "Lies," Eleanor whispered. "All of it. You want me to believe you struck her out of justice?" Darius asked, forcing each word through clenched teeth. "I want you to look at what you refused to see," Sienna said. "What your father signed. What your mother blessed." Eleanor's eyes filled, fury and shame fighting inside them. "She's using your guilt against you. She knows you'll chase a wound until it bleeds." Sienna took a measured step to the side, not toward Eleanor, but toward the bed, toward the space beneath it. "You came home without notice," she said. "Good. That means you might be ready to see." "See what?" "How your name was stapled to other people's losses." "Don't you touch anything," Eleanor said, voice cracking. "Darius, stop her." His hand hovered at his side, fingers flexing. "Move away from my mother." Sienna crouched. Her fingers disappeared into the shadow under the bed frame and returned with a battered folder thick with papers. The cardboard edges were softened by years of handling, a corner had been reinforced with clear tape. She did not hand it to him like a bomb. She dropped it on the rug and let it hit with a heavy flap. Eleanor gasped as if the sound pierced her. "No. Darius, don't look at those." He stared at the folder like it might open its own mouth and speak. Then he knelt. His knees pressed into the wool. The rug smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and dust. He slid his fingers under the top flap and pulled free the first document. Letterhead he recognized. A date from his last year of high school. A contract for temporary occupancy, that read, to any honest eye, like eviction carved into legalese. A signature he knew as well as his own, his father's, broad strokes across the bottom. A second page, payment plan. Missed installments in red. Final notice stamped. Property transferred. His throat tightened. He glanced at Sienna. She watched not him but Eleanor, as if each second of his reading burned a little brighter across the older woman's face. Forged, Eleanor said, too quickly. Those can be forged. Darius turned the page. Another contract. Another address. He recognized the neighborhood, on the edge of a development his company had celebrated as a revitalization. He read the clause that let penalties multiply like mold in a damp room. He read the date the electricity had been cut, the week before winter hit. He tried not to picture a kitchen going dark with a pot half-boiled on the stove. "Who kept this here?" he asked, voice thin. Sienna answered, "I did. Because she'd burn them if I didn't." "Because they're not what they look like," Eleanor said, even smaller, even harder. "Because context matters. What context makes bruises on your face make sense," he said, sharper than he meant to. Eleanor's mouth trembled. "I didn't raise you to take a stranger's word over mine. You raised me to love the truth," he said, and hated that his voice shook. If this has you torn between rage and doubt, subscribe now, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because the next page doesn't soften anything. Sienna nudged the folder with the toe of her shoe. "Keep going." He did. A letter from a woman asking for an extension because her husband had been injured on site. A denial from a manager Darius recognized, someone who'd bought him a drink and toasted to grit. A stamped photo of a house before and after, a porch with a tricycle on it replaced by square glass and the word luck slapped across the listing. His pulse counted each line. His father's initials in the margin felt like fingerprints on a throat. He looked up at Sienna. "And you?" "My father's shop was on Cicero and 19th, she said. He thought the clause meant a grace period. It meant a countdown. When the power cut he tried to keep the machines running with a generator. Carbon monoxide does not respect dignity." Eleanor shut her eyes. "I didn't know." "Of course you did," Sienna said. "He wrote you. You sent flowers." Darius flinched like she'd hit him. A memory crawled in, the day his mother mentioned sending lilies to that man from the neighborhood project, her tone brisk, charitable. He hadn't asked why. He lived then in a world where flowers were an answer. He shuffled papers with hands that didn't feel like his. Tucked behind a photocopy was a handwritten note, ink bled around the edges. The name at the bottom matched Sienna's last name. He didn't read it out loud. He couldn't. Eleanor shifted in the chair, wheels squeaking against the floor. "If these were wrong, if they hurt people, I am sorry. But this," she lifted her bruised cheek with shaking fingers, "is not justice. It is cruelty." Sienna's eyes flicked to the bruise and back to Darius. Sometimes the only thing a fortress understands is force. Darius set the papers on the rug and pressed his hand to his brow. The lamplight seemed too bright, the room's corners tilted. His mother's breath hitched in soft, panicked pulls. The clock kept ticking, a judge refusing recess. "I trusted you," he said to Sienna, and to the room, and to the father who wasn't here to answer. "I trusted both of you." "You wanted to trust the story," Sienna said. "It was easier than reading the pages." "You think I wanted this?" Eleanor snapped, voice breaking at last. "You think I asked to be the face of the bills your father signed? I wrote checks to charities for years trying to scrub it clean. I visited churches. I met with families. And every time I was told, it's done. We can't go back. I did the only thing left, I looked after you. I kept you from carrying this rot. I kept the door closed. And now I opened it," Darius said. The room answered with silence, heavy and precise. If this hits you in the gut, subscribe now, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because Darius has to choose, protection or truth. He stood, the folder in his hands again, heavier now that it contained more than paper. He walked to the dresser and set it down, not as evidence to be bagged, not as trash to be burned, but as something that would demand its day. He turned back. Eleanor watched him like a mother begging a judge. Sienna watched him like a witness daring a verdict. "What happens next?" he said, and heard how thin it sounded. Sienna lifted her chin. "You keep reading. And you stop pretending bruises are the worst thing this house has done." "Get out," Eleanor whispered to Sienna, trembling. "Get out of my room." Sienna didn't move. "Your son is here now. You don't get to send away the truth." Darius felt the shape of the night shift, the moment before a storm actually breaks. He could call security and have Sienna removed. He could kneel beside his mother and promise nothing would change. Or he could do what the folder demanded and step off the path his family had paved for him with silk and silence. He turned another page. A city permit, expedited. A signature that should have taken 3 months appearing in 3 days. A note in the margin, EK approved. His eyes snapped to his mother. Eleanor's mouth opened, closed. "I signed to keep people employed." "Your father," she stopped. Whatever followed didn't have enough air. Darius pressed his thumb against his own pulse as if he could force it to slow. He looked at Sienna. "If you ever raise your hand to her again, I will personally put you out on the street. Do you understand me?" Sienna held his stare. "Perfectly. But I'm not burning this," he said, resting his palm on the folder. "And I'm not pretending I didn't see what I saw." Eleanor's tears slipped over the ridge of her cheekbone. "Please," she whispered. "Don't let her take you from me." Darius opened his mouth and found no easy promise waiting. He glanced at the door, then at the clock, then back at the folder like it was breathing. He slid the top document free. The first line named a neighborhood he'd driven past 100 times without seeing. His father's signature sat above a line that might as well be an apology he never gave. He read. And as he read, the house shifted around him, not the walls, but the air inside them, the part that remembers what people do when they think no one is watching. He kept going until the words swam. When he looked up, neither woman spoke. The next page waited with the patience of something that knows it will be read. And the night, which had begun with a slap, narrowed to a point where a son had to choose which truth to carry into morning. The folder sat on the dresser where Darius had left it, its spine cracked open, pages fanned like a wound unwilling to close. The silence in the room was brittle, filled with the scrape of Eleanor's shallow breaths and the steady hum of the lamp. Darius leaned against the dresser, arms folded, staring at neither woman but at the pages themselves. He wasn't reading anymore, yet the words lingered in his mind: penalties, defaults, transfers, evictions. His father's signature, his mother's initials, stamped approval lines like scars across each document. He had walked in expecting rest. Now the night pressed on him like stone. Eleanor shifted in her chair, the wheels squeaking softly. "Son," she whispered, voice hoarse, "this doesn't define us. You can't let her twist it into more than it is." Darius raised his eyes. She looked small under the lamplight, her bruised cheek already darkening. Fragile. And yet, those initials in ink refused to vanish. Across the room, Sienna stood with her arms folded, gaze steady. She hadn't moved since he put the folder down, as if her work was already done. Darius forced his voice level. "You've both spoken. Now I want the truth. Start from the beginning." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the armrest. "Not tonight. Not like this. You're exhausted, you've been traveling." "I'm not exhausted," Darius cut in. His voice was low, but steel threaded through it. "I'm wide awake. And I want to know why those papers exist." The room seemed to hold its breath. If you've ever stood between two voices, one begging, one accusing, subscribe now, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what Darius hears next will shake every certainty he thought he had. Eleanor swallowed, her throat bobbing. When your father ran those projects, there were losses. Yes. People displaced, businesses closed. But it wasn't cruelty, it was progress. He built opportunities out of decay. He told me, he promised, what was taken would be rebuilt better. Sienna let out a short, bitter laugh. Rebuilt better? Tell that to the families who slept in cars because rent doubled overnight. Tell that to my father, who wrote letters begging for an extension until the carbon monoxide from a generator put him in the ground. Darius's jaw flexed. He had expected denial, not this steady stream of detail that matched too neatly with what he'd read. He looked at his mother. You knew about her family? Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes darted to Sienna, then back to him. I knew of them. Many wrote letters. I couldn't answer them all. I sent flowers. Donations. I tried. Sienna's gaze sharpened. She sent lilies to my mother's funeral. Lilies, when the rent notice was still pinned to our door. Darius's stomach turned. Stop, Eleanor whispered. Don't let her twist this. We gave to charities every year, we built shelters, we paid for schools. You bought absolution, Sienna snapped. Darius lifted a hand, and both women fell silent. He rubbed his temple, the beginnings of a headache burning behind his eyes. I don't need flowers or charities. I need facts. Were these contracts legal? Yes, Eleanor said quickly. Legal, Sienna echoed, her tone laced with venom. Legal doesn't mean moral. Darius gripped the edge of the dresser, knuckles pale. For the first time in years, he felt like the boy sitting in the back of board meetings, watching men in suits talk about numbers while ignoring faces. He had promised himself he'd never become numb like them. Yet here he stood, caught in the same script. He turned back to his mother. Why didn't you ever tell me? Her eyes glistened. Because you were a child, Darius. You deserved innocence. You deserved not to carry our mistakes on your shoulders. Your mistakes still landed on my doorstep, he muttered. If this moment has your chest tight with anger and doubt, subscribe now, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because Darius is about to face a choice no child should ever face. Sienna's voice cut the silence. You see the truth in front of you. She watched. She signed. She smiled for cameras while families like mine buried fathers. Eleanor trembled. And you think striking me tonight undoes that? You think bruises heal what was broken? Sienna's eyes flickered, but her stance didn't soften. It doesn't heal. It forces the past into the present, where it belongs. Darius stepped away from the dresser, closer to the middle of the room. The weight of both their gazes bore down on him. His mother's, desperate, pleading, begging him not to let the documents eclipse her love. Sienna's, hard, unflinching, daring him to acknowledge what his family had been built on. He wanted to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Because the truth was, both of them were right and both were wrong. His mother had signed those papers. Sienna had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And he was the one standing between them, unable to decide which betrayal cut deeper. The silence stretched until the air felt heavy. Then Eleanor's voice broke it, trembling but firm. Darius, I raised you to lead. To protect what's yours. Don't let her steal that from you. Sienna's reply came just as sharp. Or let her bury you under lies. Choose carefully. The papers won't vanish. And neither will I. The grandfather clock struck once, the chime low and resonant, as if the house itself acknowledged the moment. Darius inhaled slowly, fighting the tremor in his chest. This doesn't end tonight, he said finally. But it begins here. Eleanor sagged back in her chair, relief flickering across her features for a heartbeat. Sienna's lips curved faintly, as if she had expected nothing less. Darius moved toward the folder, lifting it once more. The papers rustled under his grip, heavier than stone. His hands shook as he tucked them back inside, the edges scraping against each other like teeth. He set the folder against his side, his decision clear. Tomorrow, I will know everything. Eleanor's eyes widened. Darius. Tomorrow, he repeated, his tone final. Sienna's gaze met his, and for the first time that night, a spark of uncertainty flickered in her eyes. If your pulse is racing right now, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what waits in those papers may shatter more than trust, it may rewrite blood itself. The documents lay scattered across his desk like a battlefield of ink and paper. Contracts, eviction notices, letters written in desperation. Every page carried a voice, and none of them belonged to him. His name wasn't on the signatures, but the bloodline was his, and that was enough. He sat with his head in his hands, elbows digging into polished wood. Outside, dawn pressed faint light against the glass walls of the study. The mansion was waking, but he wasn't part of its rhythm anymore. He was inside something else now, something older, darker. When the clock struck 6, he lifted the first page again. It was brittle at the edges, as though time itself had tried to erase it but failed. The language was clinical, penalties, forfeitures, seizures, but between the lines he read lives dismantled. A house taken from a widow. A factory shut down in winter. A school closed because the funding never arrived. And always, always, his father's signature. He clenched his fists. For years, he had defended the Kane name as though it were armor. Now it felt like a curse stitched into his skin. If you've ever discovered that the ground you stood on was built from someone else's grave, subscribe now, because what Darius is about to face next will leave scars deeper than wealth could ever cover. The study door creaked. He didn't look up. He already knew who it was. Eleanor Kane's voice came soft, careful, the way someone speaks to a wounded animal. You've been awake all night. Darius stacked the papers into a crooked pile. You should have told me. She wheeled closer, her blanket slipping from one shoulder. The bruise on her cheek was darker now, a violet bloom beneath tired eyes. What good would it have done? You were a boy when it happened. You couldn't change it. I could have known, he said, sharper than he intended. I could have chosen what kind of man to be with both eyes open. Eleanor's face crumpled. And what kind of man are you now? Darius looked down at the papers. One who doesn't know if he can still defend his own family. The silence between them stretched, heavy with years unspoken. Eleanor reached for the documents, her hand trembling. You don't understand the pressure we were under. The board demanded returns. Your father, she stopped, swallowed hard. Your father believed sacrifice was necessary. He told me to trust him. I signed because I believed him. And when families lost everything? Darius asked. Her hand dropped into her lap. I sent flowers. Donations. I thought, her voice broke. I thought it would balance out. The words cut deeper than any blade. Flowers. As if grief could be dressed in petals and left at the door. The knock came sharp, 3 times. Before Darius could respond, the door swung open. Sienna entered, her posture rigid, her eyes rimmed with shadows from a night without sleep. She carried nothing in her hands, but her presence felt heavier than any folder. Still reading? She asked, her voice low. Darius said nothing. Eleanor bristled. You shouldn't be here. I live here, Sienna replied. More honestly than either of you. Enough, Darius said. His voice cracked like a whip, and the room fell silent. He stood, papers in hand. These are facts. But facts without context are weapons. I want context. From both of you. Eleanor's fingers twisted in her blanket. We did what the law allowed. And what morality condemned, Sienna said. Darius slammed the papers onto the desk. I said context. Not rehearsed lines. The words hung, sharp as glass. Sienna stepped forward, her gaze locked on Eleanor. Tell him about the meetings. The dinners where decisions were made before the contracts were ever written. Tell him how you signed your name to make it official. Eleanor's lips trembled. I don't need to justify every decision made in those years. You do to him, Sienna said. Darius's chest burned. He turned back to his mother. Is it true? Her silence was answer enough. He dropped into his chair, head heavy. The empire he was meant to inherit now felt like a weight designed to crush him. Sienna's voice softened, almost pitying. Now you see why I couldn't serve quietly anymore. Every day in this house was a reminder of what was stolen from mine. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. So you raised your hand against me? That's your justice? Sienna didn't flinch. It was the only way to force the truth into the open. Darius looked between them, his pulse loud in his ears. His mother's frailty. Sienna's fury. The papers heavy with proof. And himself, caught in the middle, cursed by a legacy that demanded a verdict he wasn't ready to give. The clock struck again, loud, relentless. Darius rose, gathering the documents into the folder. This doesn't end here, he said. If the world deserves to know, then it won't come from fists or whispers. It will come from me. Sienna's eyes narrowed. Do you mean that? Yes. Eleanor's breath caught. Darius, don't. You'll destroy us. Maybe, he said quietly. Or maybe I'll finally free us. If your heart is pounding now, subscribe, because the choice Darius is about to make could either bury his family forever or drag every hidden sin into the light. He walked to the window, folder in hand. The sun had risen, casting long shadows across the garden. The estate looked calm, untouched, but now he saw it differently. Every brick, every polished surface, every gilded frame, what had it cost? Behind him, Eleanor wept silently. Sienna stood motionless, her eyes fixed on him. Darius closed his eyes. For the first time, he felt the full weight of the Cain name, not as privilege, but as curse. And as the day broke, he knew there would be no going back. The morning carried no peace. By the time Darius Cain left the study, the weight of the folder dragged at his arm like a chain. His footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, steady but uneven, as if each stride came with a question he couldn't answer. He had read enough to know the Cain Empire was poisoned at the root. Now came the harder task, deciding what to do with that knowledge. The mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum. Sunlight streamed through glass panes but offered no warmth. Portraits of ancestors lined the corridor, their painted eyes following him with silent judgment. Every polished surface reflected him back not as heir but as executioner, waiting to pass sentence. He entered the drawing room where his mother waited, wrapped in a shawl despite the warmth. Eleanor's head lifted when he appeared, relief softening her expression until she saw the folder still in his hand. The light dimmed in her eyes. Darius, she whispered, voice lined with exhaustion. Please. Enough for one night. Put it away. He set the folder on the low table between them with deliberate care. It doesn't go away because I stop looking. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the fabric of her shawl. Your father built an empire that supported thousands. Do you think every empire is clean? Progress always has a cost. Progress isn't an excuse, Darius said. His voice was low, but the words struck like stone. It's a disguise. Her breath faltered. She turned her face toward the window, away from his stare. You sound like her. As if summoned, the door opened and Sienna stepped inside, silent but unafraid. Her eyes swept the room, landing on the folder before rising to meet his. Did you decide? I decided nothing yet, Darius said. You decided enough to keep reading, she replied. Eleanor's head snapped toward her. You have no place here. This house made a place for me long before you knew my name, Sienna said coldly. I served. I listened. I watched. And I kept records when you buried them. The air thickened, charged with old secrets and fresh defiance. Darius leaned back, studying them both. His mother's fragility trembled in the lamplight, but her silence carried the weight of complicity. Sienna's defiance burned bright, but behind it lived grief sharpened into anger. Both women demanded his loyalty. Both offered ruin. If you've ever been forced to choose between blood and truth, subscribe now, because Darius is about to cross a line that cannot be uncrossed. Darius broke the silence. I want access to the archives. Every box, every ledger. If there's more buried, I'll find it myself. Eleanor stiffened. That's madness. The archives are confidential, sealed by law and by the board. You'll bring scrutiny we can't survive. That's the point, he said. Her hand trembled as it clutched the armrest. You'll tear us apart. We're already torn, he answered. Sienna stepped closer, her voice almost gentle now. I can help you. I know where things are hidden, records they never expected anyone to look for. Eleanor's voice broke, sharp and desperate. And what will she demand in return, Darius? Vengeance? Blood? Don't mistake her obsession for righteousness. Sienna's eyes flashed, but she didn't deny it. Call it what you want. But he deserves the truth. Darius turned away from both, staring at the folder. He remembered being a boy, running his hands across the polished conference table while his father promised that one day it would all be his. Now he wondered if that inheritance had been a throne or a guillotine. Tonight, he said finally. I'll go through the archives tonight. The rest of the day crawled. Meetings blurred. Phone calls went unanswered. Even the staff moved cautiously, as if they sensed the house itself was waiting for something to break. When night fell, Darius carried the folder down into the west wing where a locked room waited behind a panel door. He entered with a key few remembered he even had. The archives smelled of dust and varnish, the air heavy with the weight of decades. Rows of cabinets stretched like silent soldiers, drawers labeled with years and project names. He placed the folder on a table and drew open the first drawer. Stacks of ledgers greeted him, each spine marked with the cane crest. He pulled one free and flipped it open. Columns of numbers stared back, precise and merciless. Behind him, footsteps echoed. He turned to find Sienna at the door, her expression unreadable. I said I'd help, she reminded him. He didn't protest. Instead, he gestured toward the shelves. Then show me where the bones are buried. She moved past him, her fingers tracing along the cabinets until they stopped at one drawer. She slid it open and lifted a ledger heavier than the rest. Inside were not just numbers but notes scribbled in margins, names, promises, threats disguised as agreements. Darius read in silence, each page heavier than the last. Do you see now? Sienna asked quietly. He nodded once, the weight pressing deeper into his chest. This is worse than I imagined. Because it was never meant for you to imagine, she said. Eleanor's voice startled them both. She stood in the doorway, shawl clutched tight, eyes shining in the dim light. Stop this, she whispered. Both of you. Stop before you can't turn back. Darius stared at her, his throat raw. You should have told me. I was protecting you, she said. No, he replied. You were protecting the Empire. Her tears caught the light, but she didn't deny it. If your chest is heavy right now, subscribe, because what Darius is about to uncover will not only expose the past, it may destroy the future. The three of them stood in the archive, the silence pressing down. Pages rustled in the stillness as if whispering their own confessions. Darius closed the ledger and set it aside. "Tomorrow, I speak to the board. If they won't confront this, I will." Eleanor's gasp echoed through the chamber. "You'll be ruined. They'll cut you out before you can open your mouth." "Maybe," he said. "But at least I won't be complicit." Sienna's gaze met his, fierce and unyielding. "Then you'll finally be the man your father never was." Eleanor stepped forward, her frail hands trembling as they reached for him. "And you'll kill what's left of this family." Darius stood between them, the ledger still warm in his hands, the future balanced on the edge of his choice. And in the silence of the archives, he realized that the first crack in the Kane Empire had already split wide open, and there was no stopping what came next. The boardroom had always been a stage, but tonight it felt like a battlefield. Darius Kane stood alone at the head of the long polished table, his reflection stretched thin across its glossy surface. Empty chairs stared back at him, waiting to be filled by men and women who had built careers on silence. He had rehearsed what he would say, how he would hold the folder high like a weapon, how he would strip away decades of lies with words sharper than any blade. But when the doors opened and the first directors walked in, his certainty cracked. They moved like predators dressed in silk, calm, composed, already certain of their power. Each nod, each clipped greeting was a reminder, this was their empire, not his. The folder rested at his side. Heavy. Accusing. By the time all 12 had taken their seats, the air in the room was heavy with expectation. At the far end, a director named Lowell adjusted his cufflinks, his gaze lingering on the folder with something between suspicion and disdain. "You called this meeting, Mr. Kane," he said smoothly. "I trust it's important." Darius set the folder on the table and slid it open. Pages fanned out like cards in a dealer's hand. "These are records," he said. His voice trembled at first but steadied. "Records you buried. Contracts signed in my father's name, approved in my mother's hand. Deals that destroyed lives." The words landed, but no one flinched. They simply stared. Lowell leaned back, a small smile tugging his lips. "We did what was necessary. Expansion always requires sacrifice. You've benefited from it as much as any of us." "No," Darius said firmly. "I benefited from ignorance." A ripple of discontent passed around the table. One director whispered to another. A woman at the far end tapped her pen in irritation. "You're young," Lowell said, almost kindly. "Idealistic. You think morality belongs in business. But morality doesn't keep lights on. It doesn't feed shareholders. It doesn't win contracts." Darius's hands curled into fists. "And what about the families buried under those contracts? What about the workers left to starve while you toasted to success?" The room remained still. Unmoved. If you've ever realized that the people you thought were allies would rather protect power than truth, subscribe now, because Darius is about to learn the cost of standing alone. The argument stretched for an hour, voices rising and falling like tides. Some dismissed him outright. Others listened but shook their heads, unwilling to risk their fortunes for conscience. Only one or two showed hesitation, their silence heavier than their words. Finally, Lowell closed the folder with deliberate calm and slid it back across the table. "You've made your point," he said. "But nothing changes. These papers remain in this room, and so do you. Unless you'd rather not remain part of this family." Darius froze. The threat was unspoken, but its meaning clear: step out of line, and he would be cut off, not just from the board, but from everything. "I won't be complicit," he said quietly. "Then you won't be one of us," Lowell replied. Hours later, the mansion was silent again. Darius sat alone in his study, the folder once more at his side. His reflection stared back from the window, pale and hollow. For the first time, he understood how deep the rot went, not just in his family, but in the very structure they had built. The door opened softly. Sienna entered, her eyes scanning him before falling to the folder. "You showed them?" "Yes." His voice was hoarse. "And?" "They laughed." She moved closer, her presence steady. "Of course they did. Men who've gorged themselves on power don't give it back because you ask." Eleanor's voice carried from the hall. "And what did you expect?" She wheeled into the study, her shawl draped across her shoulders like a shield. "They'll never admit guilt, Darius. Not while there's still profit to protect. You've done nothing but make yourself their enemy." "I don't care," he said, standing. His voice rang louder than he intended. "If being their enemy means standing with the truth, then so be it." Sienna's gaze sharpened. "Then you've chosen." Eleanor shook her head, tears brimming. "You don't understand. They won't just strip you of your seat. They'll come for you. For everything. The board protects itself." That night, Darius couldn't sleep. He walked the halls like a restless ghost, the folder under his arm. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow stretched longer. When he returned to his room, the door was ajar. He froze. Slowly, he pushed it wider. On his desk lay another document, one he hadn't placed there. A single page, folded once. He opened it with trembling hands. It was a contract he hadn't seen before, his own name at the bottom, forged with precision. A deal granting authority to liquidate assets he had never approved. The date was tomorrow. His stomach twisted. This wasn't history anymore. This was war. If your pulse is racing, subscribe, because Darius is no longer fighting the past. Someone inside the house is already moving to erase him from the future. The page trembled in Darius Kane's hand, though the mansion around him stood perfectly still. The forged signature, his signature, glared back under lamplight. Every curve of the penstroke was his, yet he hadn't touched that contract. Someone wanted him erased. He laid the paper flat on his desk, his pulse drumming in his throat. The date stamped on it was tomorrow. By morning, someone could liquidate assets in his name, strip his authority, dismantle the last claim he held to the empire. And when the smoke cleared, he would look guilty of orchestrating it himself. The air pressed heavy against him. He crossed the room, shoved the curtains aside, and looked into the garden. The hedges swayed under a restless wind, shadows rippling like figures crouched just out of sight. He pressed a palm against the glass, his reflection fractured by moonlight. Behind him, the door creaked. Darius spun, heart seizing. Sienna stood in the threshold, her face half hidden in shadow. "You're awake," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He only held the paper higher, letting the lamplight expose it. "Explain this." Her eyes flickered. Not shock, not denial, calculation. "Where did you find it?" "On my desk," he said. She stepped closer. "Then you already know what it means." "What it means," he snapped, "is that someone here wants me destroyed. You, or her." Sienna tilted her head. "And which do you believe?" His silence stretched. He wanted to say neither, but the paper burned between his fingers like proof. If you've ever woken to realize the walls you trusted are hiding knives, subscribe now, because Darius is about to learn that family and servants bleed betrayal the same. Sienna moved around the desk, her movement slow, deliberate. "I didn't write that contract. But I know who could have." He frowned. "Who?" "Your mother," she said simply. The word struck harder than any slap. Darius's chest tightened. Eleanor, frail and trembling in her chair, couldn't have forged the handwriting, but she had power enough to direct others. And motive, to protect the empire, to silence him before his voice reached beyond the boardroom. "You expect me to believe she'd frame her own son?" he asked. "I expect you to believe she's capable of anything if it keeps this house standing," Sienna said. You saw her initials on those contracts. She signed away lives once. Do you think she wouldn't sign away yours? He slammed the paper down. And why not you? You've had access to every room. You knew about the archives. You knew where the folder was hidden. Maybe you want me gone so you can finish what you started. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. If I wanted you gone, I'd have let the board do it. Instead, I gave you the truth. The room pulsed with silence. Neither spoke. Then, from the hallway, a sound, soft, steady. The squeak of wheels. Eleanor appeared at the door, her shawl drawn tight, her face pale. She looked between them, her eyes narrowing at the paper on the desk. What's this? Darius lifted it. A contract with my name forged. Found in my room. Her face didn't change. Too controlled. Where did it come from? That's what I'm asking you. Her voice cracked. You think I'd do that to you? You've done worse, Sienna murmured. Eleanor's eyes burned. You don't get to accuse me, girl. Sienna's lips curved, bitter. Then tell him you didn't. Eleanor's hands shook, but she said nothing. The silence roared louder than any denial. Darius's throat closed. The two women faced each other like predators circling, and he was caught between them. Finally, Eleanor whispered, Darius, listen to me. You're being manipulated. She's setting you against me. He laughed bitterly. And you've never set me against the truth. Her face broke, the mask slipping. I did it to protect you. By forging my name. I didn't, she insisted. But if I had, it would be because you don't understand what danger you're in. Once the board sees you as a liability, they won't hesitate. This is bigger than us. And yet it always comes back to us, Darius said, voice low. If your chest is tight right now, subscribe, because Darius is about to discover that the person closest to him may be the one holding the blade. The night deepened. Shadows pressed against the windows. Darius sat at the desk again, the contract spread before him. Eleanor hovered near the door, trembling, while Sienna lingered in the corner, silent but watchful. The air was suffocating, thick with suspicion. He picked up the page once more, tracing the forged signature. Whoever had planted it knew his handwriting perfectly. That wasn't coincidence. That was intimacy. Someone inside this house had studied him close enough to replicate him. His mind reeled back over the past nights, staff moving quietly, doors left ajar, the way Sienna always seemed to know when he'd found something, the way Eleanor always arrived at the exact wrong moment. He stared at them both. One of you put this here. Neither answered. I'll find out which, he said, his voice steady now. Outside, the wind howled. A shutter banged against the wall. Somewhere deeper in the mansion, a light flickered, then died. And as the silence wrapped tighter, Darius knew one truth with certainty: he was no longer safe inside his own home. The mansion was no longer silent, it breathed with unease. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the wind against the shutters carried weight. Darius Kane walked the halls like a man haunted, the forged contract tucked in his jacket. Sleep had abandoned him, but so had trust. He paused outside the dining room. The long table glistened under the chandelier, but no one sat there. No laughter, no clinking glasses, just polished emptiness. He could almost hear echoes of the past. His father's booming toast, his mother's careful smile, but they faded into dust. The Kane legacy had been built on deception, and now its walls whispered treachery back at him. When he entered the library, he found Sienna waiting. She stood near the shelves, her arms folded, her dark eyes steady. You're avoiding me, she said. I'm avoiding everyone, he answered, closing the door behind him. She nodded at the jacket where the contract bulged. You still have it. I'm not letting it out of my sight, he replied. For a moment, silence stretched, broken only by the tick of the mantel clock. Then Sienna stepped closer. "I told you it wasn't me." "And she swears it wasn't her," Darius said. "One of you is lying." "Or someone else had the access," she countered. His jaw clenched. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe his mother. But belief was a luxury, and the contract was a fact. If you've ever felt betrayal circling you from every side, subscribe now, because Darius is about to face the night where trust finally collapses. The door creaked open. Eleanor rolled in, her shawl draped over her shoulders, her face pale. Her eyes darted between them. Still whispering in corners, she asked, bitterness lacing her voice. "No corners," Darius said sharply. "Only questions." She wheeled forward, her hands gripping the armrests. "Then ask me to my face." He pulled the contract free and set it on the table. "This is proof someone wants me gone. It was planted in my room. If it wasn't you, and it wasn't her, then who?" Eleanor's gaze hardened as she studied the page. "I've told you already." "Not me." "And I've told you it wasn't me," Sienna said. Their voices clashed like steel. Darius pressed his palms against the table. "Enough. Both of you. I won't play mediator while someone sharpens knives behind my back." Eleanor leaned forward. "You're my son. My blood. How can you even suspect me?" "Because you've hidden truths before," he said coldly. Her face broke at that, but she didn't deny it. Sienna spoke, her tone quieter. "She fears losing you more than losing the empire. That fear makes people dangerous." Eleanor snapped her gaze to her. "And you? What do you fear?" "That your father's ghost will vanish if no one else pays for what happened to him." The word struck Sienna hard, her fists clenched at her sides. Darius felt the room tilt. His mother's desperation, Sienna's fury, his own confusion, they swirled like smoke, choking him. Later, the house grew darker. Rain tapped against the windows, and the wind rattled the shutters. Darius carried the contract back to his room, locking the door behind him. The lamp glowed dim on the desk. He spread the paper out again, studying every detail, every line of the forged signature. It was perfect, too perfect. Whoever had done this hadn't guessed at his handwriting, they had practiced it. Which meant someone had studied him closely, long enough to mimic the exact weight of his pen. His stomach nodded. That wasn't the work of an outsider. That was the work of someone inside. He pushed away from the desk and crossed to the mirror. His reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, jaw tight. He no longer recognized himself. The floor creaked. He spun, heart hammering. The door was still locked. But a shadow slipped under the crack, movement in the hall. He grabbed the contract, shoved it into the drawer, and strode to the door. When he yanked it open, the hallway was empty. Only silence, only shadows. But he knew he wasn't alone. If your pulse is racing, subscribe, because the walls of this mansion aren't just holding secrets, they're holding eyes. By midnight, he found himself in the gallery, portraits looming over him. Moonlight cut through tall windows, striping the floor. He stood beneath the painted stare of his father, the man who had signed away lives. Now the same blood coursed in his veins, and he wondered if the curse of the Kane name was watching him from that gilded frame. Behind him, a soft voice broke the stillness. "They'll take everything from you." He turned. Sienna stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by moonlight. "They already have," he said. She stepped closer. "No. Not yet. You still have the choice. Destroy that paper, bury the truth, and you'll survive. But if you fight," she stopped, shaking her head. "If you fight, you'll end up with nothing." "And what about you?" he asked. Her eyes glistened. "I've lived with nothing for years. I want to see them stripped bare." He studied her, searching for deception. But all he saw was fire. A sound echoed down the hall. The squeak of wheels. Eleanor. She entered, her face pale in the moonlight. Don't listen to her. She wants you ruined. No, Sienna said firmly. I want him free. Eleanor's voice trembled. Free. Or broken like my family has been since the day you walked through that door. They faced each other across the gallery, the storm outside rattling the windows. Darius stood between them, his breath quickening. Lightning flashed. For an instant, he saw both women's faces illuminated, one lined with desperation, the other carved by grief. And he realized the truth, whether guilty or innocent, both were dangerous. The storm roared, thunder shaking the glass. And from somewhere deeper in the mansion, a sound that froze him, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, not belonging to any of them. The gallery doors stood open, darkness beyond. Darius felt his skin prickle. Someone else was in the house. And as he turned toward the shadows, the certainty struck him, the betrayal hadn't just been planted. It was walking toward him now. The footsteps drew closer. Slow, measured, deliberate. Darius Kane's heart pounded as he turned toward the gallery doors. The storm rattled the windows, thunder rolling overhead, but the sound was unmistakable, someone else was inside the mansion. Eleanor clutched her shawl tighter, her wheelchair squeaking as she tried to turn toward the sound. Sienna's fists clenched, her body poised as if she expected the darkness to strike. The figure appeared at last, stepping into the pale shaft of moonlight. A man, tall, his suit damp with rain. His face was unfamiliar, but the insignia pinned to his lapel was not, the crest of the Kane board. Lowell. Darius's chest tightened. He hadn't expected the director here, not in his home, not at this hour. Still awake, Mr. Kane. Lowell's voice was smooth, too calm for the storm that thundered around them. Good. Saves me the trouble of waiting. Eleanor's voice broke. You shouldn't be here. Lowell smiled thinly. I shouldn't have to be. But your son insists on digging up corpses best left buried. Darius's jaw clenched. You forged the contract. Lowell stepped closer, his shoes clicking against the marble. Clever boy. But clever doesn't save you. The board is finished with you, Darius. By morning, those papers will ensure your seat is gone, your name ruined. All I need is for you to stay quiet. And if I don't? Then accidents happen, Lowell said simply. If you've ever felt the air tighten as someone finally reveals their true intentions, subscribe now, because Darius is about to face the moment where silence and survival are no longer the same. Sienna moved between them, her posture rigid. So it's true. You'd rather erase him than face the truth. Lowell's eyes flicked to her. And you? The maid with a grudge. Do you think anyone believes you? You're a story no one listens to. Her face hardened, but she didn't move. Eleanor's voice quivered. Lowell, please. Leave him out of this. Take what you want from me. Darius's head snapped toward her. What are you saying? She lowered her gaze. If my silence is the price, I'll pay it. The betrayal cut deeper than steel. Lowell smirked. See? Even your mother knows where loyalty belongs. Darius's hand trembled at his side. His entire life he had carried the Kane name like a shield. Tonight, he realized it was a target. No, he said. His voice rang louder than the storm. Not anymore. He strode to the table, seized the forged contract, and held it high. The paper crackled in his fist. This is your weapon, he said. Then I'll turn it into mine. Lowell's smile thinned. You don't have the courage. I don't need courage, Darius said, his voice like iron. I need the truth. Sienna's eyes widened, her breath sharp. Eleanor whispered his name, but he ignored them both. In one motion, he tore the contract in half. The sound ripped through the gallery louder than the thunder outside. Lowell's mask slipped. Rage flickered across his face. "You'll regret that." "No," Darius said. "You will." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then Lowell turned sharply, disappearing back into the darkness of the hall. His footsteps echoed until they faded, leaving only the storm. The gallery felt colder now. Eleanor sagged in her chair, tears sliding down her face. "You've doomed us," she whispered. Sienna stepped closer to Darius, her voice low. "Or saved us." For the first time, he chose to break their chain. But Darius's chest burned. He knew this wasn't victory. It was a declaration of war. He walked to the window, staring out at the storm. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the garden, and in that flash he saw them, figures. 2, maybe 3, standing near the hedge, watching the house. Not Lowell. Others. Waiting. The folder weighed heavy in his hand. The board would never let the truth see daylight. Tonight was only the beginning. If your pulse is racing now, subscribe, because when the storm clears, Darius will either inherit an empire built on blood or burn with it. The storm raged through the night, but inside the gallery the silence was heavier. Eleanor wept softly, her hands trembling. Sienna stood firm, her eyes fixed on Darius. And Darius? He stared out at the shadowed figures beyond the glass, his reflection fractured by rain, and he knew, the Kane Empire had always been a house divided. Now it was a battlefield. And the war had come home.